Hey y'all, this is Tristan circa 89, where I obsess over pop culture so you don't have to. So I want to talk to you guys today about the original Scream 5 script, which was released today. I read through the script, made some notes, and I want to talk about some of the things that turned out a little differently or were written a little differently in the original draft of the script. I'm actually really surprised with how closely this original draft resembles the final version of the movie. And this draft was written in 2020. So, I'm saying it's the original draft, but in and of itself, it could have been a second or third. But again, the final movie greatly resembles this draft. So let's just kind of jump right into it. So, one of the first things I want to talk about is the opening. Tara and Ghostface, who introduces himself as Charlie initially, there's a lot more banter back and forth. It really kind of, what I really liked about it really kind of gives you this sense of peace, or like Tara just thinks she's talking to this friendly old guy that knows her mom, and then there's this big twist in who she's talking to. So again, it kind of settles her into thinking, oh, this is just some guy. But then when it turns sinister, you really feel it because you kind of been lulled into this sense of this is just some boring old guy who knows her mom. Secondly, it was explicitly stated in this draft that Tara and Amber are girlfriends. So what I really thought was interesting is that, from the character descriptions from the last couple years and things like that, we were told that they were girlfriends, but it wasn't really explicitly stated in the final version of the movie. We just get the sense that Amber is like a really close friend who's really protective of her. So yeah, in this draft, it was explicitly stated that Tara and Amber are dating. It is also mentioned that Wes and Tara previously dated, which in the final version of the film, you have that line from Mindy who's like, oh, well, that gives you motive for going after Tara. If, no, if I can't have her, nobody can. But again, we're given more of a backstory here that they actually did date previously before Tara and Amber got together. So during the scene where they're all playing pool and they're at the bar, Mrs. Carpenter is seen there and she's drunk, and we're told that she's neglectful. So that's one really big difference in this draft. Miss Carpenter is a neglectful mother, but she is around. She is in Woodsboro during the events of the film. Dewey is also introduced here. He's introduced as a drunk, and he and Vince get into an argument, and Vince beats the crap out of him, which I thought was really interesting. So going off that, in the very next scene, Vince is killed, but he isn't killed outside of the bar. He actually leaves the bar. He gets a flat tire, and it is while changing that flat tire that he's attacked by Ghostface and is ultimately stabbed in the face. So that's another thing about this draft. Some of the kills are really brutal and a lot different than what we see in the original film. So yeah, Vince gets attacked and gets stabbed in the face. So after Vince's murder, the gang meets up at the sheriff's office because Judy is questioning all of them because this guy that they got into an argument with at the bar just got murdered. So she calls them into to her office. She's interviewing them, but she zeroes in on Dewey, or at least it seems like she is. She's really asking him for help because she's like, "Hey, you know how to deal with these murders. Nobody knows this better than you. I need your help." Dewey's like, "No, I'm good. Best of luck to you guys." And a little bit before this, Chad is rambling to Wes about Liv not sleeping with him. He basically says something along the lines of, wow, she lowered herself to sleep with somebody like Vince, and she doesn't want to sleep with me. What is that all about? So I thought that was really interesting. And Wes is like, dude, we are suspects in a murder. You're a suspect in a murder. Let's not focus on stuff like that right now. Wes also insinuates that Tara is going to leave Amber to get back with him now, and Chad teases him about this. So as I mentioned, Dewey is getting questioned by Judy, and yeah, like I said, she basically is asking him for his help. Deputy Farney comes in to tell them about Samantha getting attacked at the hospital. So that scene plays out the same. Samantha getting attacked at the hospital plays out just the same. Deputy Farney comes in, tells them about the hospital attack. Dewey leaves, wishes him luck, but he's like, no, I'm not getting involved. So Judy questions Sam about the phone call and the attack. The rest of that scene kind of plays out the same. There's a few differences as far as the dialogue goes, but she ultimately tells Sam like, "Hey, why don't you go ahead and leave and let us who actually care about this town, care about Tara, take care of this." So the next scene is we're at Dewey's trailer park. We see pictures of he and Gail's wedding. We see pictures of Tatum. And then Dewey turns on the TV and Gail is on the Today Show. She's a Today Show host. So Sam tells Dewey, I'm the daughter of Billy Loomis. We need your help. That all plays out pretty much the same. Richie calls Dewey Bourbon o'clock, which I really wish they had left that in the film. He's like, I'm really going to take this from Bourbon o'clock. I love that line. So I really wish they had left that in there. So those two leave. Dewey calls Sydney. She's living in Seattle, which I don't know if the movie explicitly states where she is. For some reason, I thought it was Boston, but she's actually in Seattle. We see that her husband Mark is putting on the shoes of their 8-year-old and 6-year-old daughters. They're trying to get them out of the door to get them to school. Sydney reprimands one of her daughters for not having her backpack. Dewey calls. The conversation pretty plays out the same. She talks about how she last spoke to Gail right when Gail was had her big promotion. I guess it was a big promotion to the Today Show. Sydney also says that Gail was supposed to visit her and her family the year before, but work got in the way. So what I really love is that we definitely get the idea that Sydney and Gail are friends. They do speak, maybe not friends who speak all the time, but when big life things happen, hey, let me call Gail's like, hey, let me call Sydney. When Sydney knows Gail's going to be around the Seattle area, hey, Gail, come have dinner with me, Mark, and the kids. So I really, really love that. Like, and I think we got that sense in this movie, the final version of the movie as well. But I really love that it kind of reinforces the idea that these are two women who have come a long way. They are not enemies, they are friends. So one thing I really loved, and I really wish they had left this in the final draft. After Dewey texts Gail, and that plays out the same as it does in the finished version of the movie, he texts Gail. He's like, man, I shouldn't have sent that last text or that smiley face. He's about to take a drink. He looks over at Tatum's picture, and it's, her picture is looking at him, and he puts it face down. And the script says he doesn't want her to see him like this. I love that little moment. I feel like one thing we were robbed of in the Scream franchise, in regards to Dewey and Tatum, is him actually reacting to her death and grieving. I would have loved to have seen him grieve a little more. There's a deleted scene from Scream 4 after Olivia's murder where he brings up Tatum and how she was killed. So I really wish we had gotten that moment in the film or even a moment in Scream 2 for him to talk about that. So I really love that moment in this script, how he's like, oh no, my little sister's watching me. I can't let her see what I've become. And it was just kind of a nice callback to Tatum. So in this draft of the script, Chad and Mindy's last names are Meeks Martinez, not Meeks Martin. And also, we actually meet Mr. Carlos Martinez, their father. He's described as gregarious, built like a linebacker, and loves his kids. He's like, he is so funny. He is like the stereotypical, like, suburban dad. He starts off by asking Chad, hey, have you done your cardio, son? He brags about how good his son is at football. Then he starts talking to Mindy, whose full name is revealed to be Melinda in the script. So her full name is Melinda Meeks Martin, and everybody calls her Mindy. He talks to her about watching this artsy film, and he's like, well, you know what, kid, you can't just watch all these mindless slasher films to be a full-rounded filmmaker. So it's explicitly stated that she wants to be a filmmaker. But I loved meeting Carlos Martinez, father of the Meeks twins, because you do get the sense that he really does love his children. And Martha is, of course, in this draft as well. Her lines pretty much play out the same as they did in the final version of the film. One thing that was really interesting in this draft is that Sam explicitly states that the killer is taking revenge on Billy and Stu, or it seems like that. You know, Tara was attacked because she's connected to Samantha, who is the daughter of Billy Loomis. Vince was killed because he is the nephew of Stu Macher. So it almost seems like in this draft, the killer is taking revenge on Billy and Stu. And it almost kind of casts the killer in a weird, I don't want to say benevolent sense, but do think that's interesting, as the killer starting out going after the descendants of the original killers, which we got in the final version. I feel like they could have really spun that a little more, almost to the sense that almost in a way where you get the sense that could this killer actually be somebody who supports Sidney Prescott, and in their own twisted way, they're getting revenge in her name? I feel like that would have been an interesting motive. Instead of getting somebody who worships Billy and Stu, what if we get a killer who worships Sydney? I thought that would have been an interesting direction, but hey, that's not the direction they went. So after Mindy tells Sam, you could be the killer, Sam storms out. She goes back to the Carpenter house, and meets up with Susan, who is Mrs. Carpenter. I don't know if I stated that earlier. Mrs. Carpenter's name is Susan in this draft. They encounter each other. Mrs. Carpenter tells Sam that she always knew that Sam was like Billy. She's been able to see it in her eyes since she was a kid. And she tells Sam something along the lines of, I can't believe you attacked my baby. She's talking about Tara. I can't believe you attacked your sister. You attacked my baby girl. Which really, deeply upsets Sam. She jumps in the car, drives off, and that's when Billy appears in the rearview mirror. And in this draft, Sam actually does crash the car. So then we get the scene at the Hicks house. It plays out pretty much the same as in the film. Judy's leaving to go get some takeout. Wes is at home alone in the shower. Ghostface calls Judy, tells her he's going to kill Wes. She rushes back to the house, gets killed outside. What I loved about this draft is that the Wes attack plays out almost the same, except for when he closes the front door and locks it, he can sense that Ghostface is like, he can sense that something is about to happen. So he ducks just in time as Ghostface jumps out of a closet. He also he ducks away, puts up a fight, throws some things at Ghostface, locks himself in a room, gets into his mother's one of his mother's closets, and gets her gun out. And right as he's getting the gun out, Ghostface crashes in because of course Wes doesn't know this is one of his friends who knows his house. Ghostface crashes in from a window, I think, and this is where things get brutal. Wes is like they're both fighting for the gun. Ghostface forces the gun under Wes's chin and forces him to pull the trigger. So that's how Wes dies, from a self-inflicted gun wound that is caused by Ghostface. Ghostface makes him shoot himself, basically. Now, what leads Sam to the Hicks house is that she's gotten into this car wreck. She's hit a pole. She sees the police cruisers coming toward her. She's freaking out, but she notices they're going past her. So she figures, okay, something else has happened. That's how she gets to the Hicks house and realizes that Judy and Wes have been killed. Gail shows up. That pretty much plays out the same. She has her conversation with Sam. She has her conversation with Dewey. Sam calls Richie. And what's really interesting is that in this draft, Richie talks about how in the Stab franchise, there were no black people until Stab 2, and they ended up getting killed at the beginning, just like in Scream 2. He also talks about how there were no gay people in the franchise until Stab 4. Then Sam interrupts him and says, hey, some more killings have happened. She tells him that the sheriff has been murdered. And he's like, wait, can you do that in these movies? So I thought that was really funny, a really meta moment. He's like, wait, they killed the sheriff? So that was pretty interesting. In this draft, Mindy actually shows up at the Hicks house after Judy and Wes are murdered. Now, Sam is suspicious of her, and then Sam calls her out. She was like, well, didn't you tell Wes that he couldn't die because his mom was a character in one of the sequels? And Mindy comes to the conclusion that, okay, this killer is doing a sequel to the original one, but they're also kind of doing a greatest hits things where, hey, basically anybody can get it. Any survivor who is in that town can get it, even though this is more so like a direct sequel to the original Stab. So I thought that was really interesting. It's like, hey, he or she is going after any and everybody. So just like in the finished version of the film, Sam realizes that Tara is still at the hospital and isn't being protected by any of the deputies. So she and Dewey rush to the hospital. From there, it plays out the way it plays out in the film. Richie goes to help Tara because he says Sam told him to. They get attacked by Ghostface. Dewey and Sam show up, fight Ghostface. Ghostface kills Dewey, unfortunately. Gail arrives to the hospital. His body is being wheeled out. Sam and Richie hold her back. Sydney shows up. Sydney has a conversation with Sam about leaving town, how she can't run away. Sydney and Gail end up following Sam to Stu Macher's house. What's really interesting in this first version, is the reason they go to Amber's house, aka Stu Macher's house, is because Tara mainly wants to get back a necklace that her father gave her, that Mr. Carpenter gave her. We're told early on in the script that's the only thing he ever gave her, so she wants to get that back from Amber. I will say I like what they eventually went with about her having to get her inhaler. I feel like that was a better reason for them going to the house, just because Tara's life really was in danger without that inhaler. So that's what led them to the house. Sam also tells Tara, do not tell Amber why we're leaving. Like at this point, Sam doesn't trust anybody, and rightfully so. So the rest of the film plays out pretty much the same. Chad gets attacked. Well, Chad actually gets his throat slit. So Chad does die in this draft. Liv's death is the same. Mindy gets stabbed in the shoulder and in the stomach, collapses, and the script even says, is she dead? Is she just unconscious? So at that point, it's pretty much unclear what happened to her. And I'll tell you her ultimate fates toward the end of this review. So, or this overview, I should say. Amber goes out. There's gunfire exchanged between her and Sydney. Gil gets shot in the stomach. I loved Sydney's phone call in the original version. It's pretty much the same, but there's this throwback line to Scream 4, New Decade, New Rules. Sydney goes, "Didn't you say the same thing last decade?" Like it was really funny. She's like, "I've been there, heard that." And she tells the killer, like, "Hey, I've seen all these movies, and you know what happens every time I fucking kill anybody who comes after me." So Sydney is such a badass, so confident. She is not worried about this ghost face. I love her confidence both in this version and in the finished version of the film. So the climax overall pretty much plays out the same. Sydney and Gail beat up Amber. Um, Sam takes down Richie. The Sam, well, no, Richie and Amber have their same monologue about sequels, about how they want to turn Sam into the villain of this story, how they're going to frame her. She lured back Sydney to get the ultimate revenge for her dad and her grandmother. So they pretty much die the same in this one. Tara ends up shooting Amber after she, comes back from the dead after being set on fire. And Tara, instead of saying, "I prefer the Babadook," she says, "You are a shitty girlfriend." We find out that Mindy is in fact alive, but just barely. She is wheeled past Sam and Tara by the EMTs. She's crying. They both hold her hand, and then she gets loaded into the ambulance. The film pretty much from there ends the same way. Sam talks to Sydney about, whether she will be okay, and Sydney says eventually Billy actually tells Sam that he says something along the lines of "Good job, kid." And the film, again, from there pretty much ends the way the final version does. Again, there were a lot of really interesting differences in this. I feel like some of it was good, some of it you understand why it was cut. I feel like there's a lot of really good bits and pieces that I wish they had kept in. Hopefully, we'll get some deleted scenes once it's released on DVD and Blu-ray and all that good stuff. But overall, I really enjoyed this script. I'm going to link it below so that you guys can go read the script for yourself. I feel like it's a quick read. It's a screenplay, so you can get through it pretty quickly. I feel like if you're a fan of the Scream franchise, a fan of this Scream film, it is totally worth reading. And it'll be interesting to see where they go next. So again, my name is Tristan Circa 89, and I obsess over pop culture, so you don't have to. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.